gentlemen, it's Chase or Fate. So do you agree or disagree with the following DFS plays on tonight's 14-game MLB slate? So we got some stud pitchers on the menu this evening, with Corbin Burnes being the most expensive option. He's at 10-6. However, just a few guys down the list. Cardinals, Jack Flaherty with a soft matchup against the Tigers. He's 9-6. Chase or Fade, Flaherty is the highest scoring pitcher tonight. Paul.
I like the case for Flaherty tonight. He's 7-1 with a .94 whip in his last 10 starts, along with a 189 opposing batting average. You mentioned the soft opponent. He's also struck out 64 batters while walking only 15 in that stretch. He faces that Tigers offense that has really had trouble scoring recently. And don't forget, they won't have the DH on the road in St. Louis. And that's a major disadvantage and disruption to AL offenses that I factor into interleague matchups when the AL team's on the road. They need to really change things up for only 9 games every year. And it doesn't feel right, I'm sure, to a lot of the teams. And I'm sure the records will show over time that it's a losing proposition for those teams in that situation. I say definitely get on this train and pick Flaherty as your starting pitcher. He's going to come up big.
Matty, Jack Flaherty will be the highest scoring pitcher tonight. Chase or Fade that?
I think there's a decent chance of it. Flaherty and Corbin Burnes, to me, seem to be in a class of their own as far as upside for pitchers on the slate. And it's also a night where we have a ton of games and it's easy to fit in some cheaper bats. So even playing Burnes with Flaherty, I think is going to be a pretty easy thing to do. Flaherty gets the Tigers at home. They're losing the DH in the National League. And I think from any statistical standpoint, he just seems like an obvious call. So the reason to not play him would be in tournaments for an ownership reason. But for cash games, I think he's an absolute lock. So he seems like an easy call. And even in tournaments, maybe you just differentiate elsewhere and still just play Flaherty, because I do think he's the safest pitcher to play for his price.
Okay, Erik, what do you think?
I'm going to fade this one. I don't see how you could pick another pitcher to be the highest scoring guy on a slate that has Corbin Burnes on it. Flaherty is very good, but his 2.68 ERA is about a run better than what a lot of the ERA estimators have him as. So he's just a normal, very good pitcher. And again, great matchup, good park. But this Corbin Burnes we're talking about might be the best pitcher in baseball right now, at least best healthy pitcher with Jacob deGrom on the shelf. Now that deGrom no longer has enough innings to qualify for the leaderboards, Burnes is the leader in like everything. Second in ERA, 0.02 runs behind Walker Buehler, first in FIP, first in xFIP, first in expected ERA, tied for first in WHIP, first in strikeout rate. I mean, what more do you want from the guy? Can't really pitch any better than Corbin Burnes is pitching right now. So I don't think I would pretty much ever say anybody else is projected for more points than him, unless it's, the toughest matchup in the league. And the Reds at American Family Field isn't an easy matchup, but it's Corbin Burnes. He's transcended everything this season.
All right, let's go to a pitcher who's actually leading the majors in home runs with 40 of them. Shohei Ohtani, the highest priced hitter on the slate this evening, going up against the O's. He'll face Spencer Watkins, who actually has put up negative DK fantasy points in 3 of his last 5 outings. It feels like a Baltimore thing. Chase or Fade, the front runner for MVP, is worth this price at 6.4 tonight. Matty.
He's worth the price. I think the bigger question for me is he worth the ownership? So even at this price tag at 6,400, I still think Shohei Ohtani will be the most popular player on the entire slate, at least amongst hitters. And if you're playing cash games, you just play Ohtani because you're not worried about ownership there. You probably throw him in the outfield with Justin Upton, Jared Walsh, because you need him at first so that you can play Ohtani and Upton, play all 3 of those Angels. In tournaments, though, I think you can go elsewhere because of the ownership. So the question to me isn't whether he's worth the price tag. I think he is by far the best hitter and best hitting spot for the slate. And that's not really a question. I think it's a really easy call, at least for me. So in cash games, you absolutely play Shohei Ohtani. I think that price tag is probably too cheap for a spot against Spencer Watkins in Baltimore. He might even be worth 7 or 7,500 for a matchup that's this good. It's more for tournaments where he will still be popular even with that high price tag, where I have some concerns.
Erik, do you need this guy in your lineup tonight?
No, I don't think you need him. It's hard to call him overpriced at any price, the way his season's been going, although it's worth pointing out that in the month of August, he's hitting just 229, has enough power and walks that he has a WRC plus of 107. But a guy who's been 7% better than league average is obviously not a $6,400 player. So if you go with him, you're betting on him being better than he's been for most of the month, which, again, given the matchup in the park, that's a reasonable bet to make. But he's just not quite on the tear you'd want him to be to shell out that kind of price, I think. If I was looking for a big name at the top, I might think about Juan Soto, even with a lefty on lefty matchup against Jesus Luzardo, given how poor Luzardo's been really all year, but he's been especially bad since he moved to Miami. 9.68 ERA in 4 starts, just one more strikeout than walk. And Soto, for his part, is hitting 326 in the month of August. On base, well over half the time, 562 on base percentage. So maybe he just walks every plate appearance here, but he's the big name that I'm a little bit more interested in on tonight's slate.
All right, Paul, how do you feel about Shohei Ohtani tonight?
Well, Eric's right. For his part, Ohtani is not on a hot streak. He has only 2 extra base knocks in his last 10 games. Both of them are home runs, surprise, surprise. And he faces Watkins, who's allowed 46 hits and 16 walks over his last 40 innings pitched for a whip of 155. So definitely going to be a lot of Angels base runners on base. I just don't know that a guy who's not on top of his power stroke and hitting for a higher average, it should cost this much, no matter who it is. I think there's a lot of other more favorable batters on the slate tonight. And we all know the Orioles are the worst team in baseball, so the attention and attraction to Ohtani is going to be huge. I say I'm going to fade this option and save my money for hotter power hitters this evening. There are a number of guys, like I said, who are hitting with that combination of power and average recently that I like a lot more on this slate.
Erik, simple question here for you. Who are you chasing tonight for some value?
Yeah, so I was a company man this morning, checked out the Rotowire value report, and the top value there is Lane Thomas, outfielder for the Nationals. Cost the minimum at just $2,000. It's an interesting one. He doesn't have a very long track record. He's been exactly a league average hitter in 162 plate appearances. But he's hitting 600 through his first 6 games with the Nationals. Tiny sample size, but he's hitting the ball very hard, 64.3% hard hit rate over that small sample. He came over in that very weird John Lester trade where the Cardinals decided, A, that they're still in the mix, and B, that John Lester is the guy who's going to get them into the playoffs. Not really working out for him. Again, Thomas, not much of a track record, but you don't have to do much at all to justify a minimum cost, and he's especially because he's been moving into the leadoff spot. He'll be hitting a couple spots ahead of Juan Soto, who I talked about before, and getting the platoon advantage against Jesus Luzardo, who is definitely one of the pitchers I want to attack most on this slate. Again, just 17 strikeouts against 16 walks in his 4 starts as a Marlin. It's just not going well for him at all. Even though Luzardo may have some name recognition, I do think he's one of the guys I most want to target here.
All right, Paul, who's your value play?
You know what? It's important to get the right pitcher in if you're going to go into a tournament. And I'm going to go for a bit of a contrarian play, a guy I think who's going to come up big. As far as starting pitchers go tonight, I like Red Sox Tanner Houck as a bit of a contrarian, as I said, featuring some high-priced options along the board. He comes a little cheaper at $7,900, despite the fact he has 31 strikeouts in his last 21 innings pitched. I know he's not pitched 6 or 7 innings to start recently, but he's getting stretched out. So the key will be for me to get at least a 5 or 6 innings pitched and get the win. I say yes, particularly as his mount opponent is Griffin Jacks, who comes into Fenway Park after surrendering 11 homers in only 44 innings pitched. I see Boston ahead early and Houck cruising to a comfortable win in what might be a batting practice for the Red Sox tonight.
Matt, what do you got?
I'm a little scared to make this pick, and honestly, when I saw the slate this morning, it hurt to see that this pitcher was still on it and that he hasn't been sent down to the minors. But I have to play Jesus Luzardo here. I know Erik already kind of teed this one up with Nationals hitters, and I don't totally disagree. Like, the downside for him is significant, but Luzardo has a massive track record of strikeout upside, and he's getting the long enough leash recently. He just hasn't been very good. But his matchup really couldn't be any better. The Nationals have Juan Soto, then they have a couple of mediocre hitters, and then some really bad hitters in their lineup, and that's a team that's moving from a really hitter-friendly park in Washington to probably the most pitcher-friendly park in Miami. And Luzardo will get the innings if he's pitching well. Last start against the Braves, he had 3 shutout innings to start the game with 4 Ks, and then he fell apart in the 4th before they took him out with a few walks. But I really think the range of outcomes for Luzardo is anywhere from 4 points to 40 points, and he's only $6,400, and no one's playing him. I mean, if you look at his game log, it's about as ugly as possible. So I actually think he's a value play, but I also just for tournaments think that you almost never get a pitcher in this price range with this much upside, with this low of ownership. And yes, I'll take the risk because I think even 4 might be a high estimate for what his floor is. He probably could go negative if the start looks like some of his recent ones. But I think the upside is just so massive, and it affords you a lot as far as fitting expensive bats in too.
Erik, I'm going to put a lot of pressure on you right now. This is time for you to deliver your slate-approved pick. So your favorite overall play tonight is who and why?
Yeah, I think one of the expensive bats that we haven't touched on yet is Wander Franco at 5,200 against the Phillies. He shot up to this high price range pretty fast, even though he actually didn't look all that good early. Obviously, incredible talent, one of the best prospects in the last several years, best since Vlad Jr. probably. But over his first 27 games, hit just 220, 283, 349. Very much not special at all. And his what was supposed to be his carrying tool, which was this elite low strikeout rate, he was at 20.8%, which is better than average, but not by a meaningful amount. But suddenly, over his last 20 games, he's been tearing it up, hitting 329, 391, 582, and he's cut that strikeout rate all the way down to 9.2%. A lot of extra factors make him especially interesting tonight. He is the switch hitter, but he's been way better against lefties. Pretty small sample still at the early part of his career, but a 174 WRC plus against lefties compared to an 84 WRC plus against righties. That's wide enough split that we have to take notice, I think. And he'll face Ranger Suarez, who's been good as a reliever, but very shaky as a starter. I know he's got a 2.45 ERA, but that's about 2 runs better than what a lot of the ERA estimators say. 11 strikeouts against 10 walks in 4 starts. And he'll do that at Citizens Bank Park, which is one of the more hitter-friendly parks in the league. So I think this is a great time to jump on the Wander Franco bandwagon.
Matt, what about you, man?
So I'm looking at a similar team stack that I was looking at yesterday, where the Rockies are in Chicago against the Cubs at a time of year, and just coincidentally, it happens to be a point where the wind seems like it's going to be helping hitters again tonight. It's a little warm there. So I think it's a pretty good hitting environment, even though it's obviously not Coors Field. But you're also not getting the ownership of Coors Field on the Rockies, who are all priced in the $4,000 to $5,000 range. They were actually my favorite stack last night, even with Trevor Story getting the night off. He should be back in there tonight. He made a pinch hit appearance, so it wasn't injury related. They just didn't. They just wanted to give him a day off for whatever reason. But I think Justin Steele is a beatable matchup for sure, and the Rockies just will have to be less popular than some of the other teams that are in, I think, objectively much better spots, like the Angels, most specifically in Baltimore, will garner just such a huge chunk of the ownership that beyond that, it's kind of just find the best possible values you can, because I'm not sure if there really is a chalk team after the Angels. So I do think the Rockies are up there as far as salary saving, which is important if you want to play guys like Corbin Burns and Jack Flaherty. I don't think paying up for the most expensive bats on the slate is necessarily the route, because we do have some really good high-end pitchers, though. So I think the Rockies are a pretty good value stack overall across the board. Trevor Story, if I have to pick a single player out of the stack, but I really like the team overall.
Paul, bring us home, dude. Your slate-approved pick, your favorite overall play this evening.
I'm going to give you a couple of game-related picks and a reason for fans to watch the Nats and Marlins, because if I don't talk about this, nobody's going to watch this game. It features 2 offenses that are putting up a lot of crooked numbers on bad teams lately, and they've had a pair of less than impressive starters throwing today. The Nats going with Erik Feedy, who has a 5.14 ERA. Marlins counter with Jesus Luzardo and a 7.76 ERA. They're going to both be out early with the ball going all over the yard, and the bullpens are terrible here. The over-under is set at 8.5. Why not go on the alternate run line, go a little higher and get a better payoff there? Then, just as I said yesterday, the underside bet is the game between the Jays and White Sox. I go wash, rinse, repeat here. The line is set at 9. And I would again recommend the alternate line to the underside for the better payoffs here. The Jays offense has stalled since Springer was sidelined, and I think some of their other everyday guys are showing signs of fatigue in the dog days here. Both lineups will face quality starting pitching in Dylan Cease and Jose Barrios. That'll go a long way toward keeping a lid on the offenses in this time.